The staff lounge erupted in laughter when Emily mentioned she'd served overseas, but the smile died on their lips. The moment rotor blades began shaking the hospital windows, Dr. Marcus Chen had just mimicked her soft voice for the third time. That morning, drawing snickers from two senior nurses, when the thunderous sound cut through the fluorescent-lit break room like a blade. Emily's hand froze halfway to her coffee cup, her knuckles whitening against the ceramic, and in that fraction of a second, everyone saw something flicker across her face, something that didn't belong to the timid 28-year-old woman they'd been belittling for 3 weeks. It belonged to someone else entirely. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing who's listening. The helicopter was descending onto the hospital's south lawn, scattering autumn leaves in violent spirals. And already security was running toward the landing zone with protocols they'd never actually expected to use. Emily set down her coffee with deliberate calm, the kind of calm that comes from muscle memory older than conscious thought, and walked toward the window. Behind her, Dr. Chen's smugness had curdled into confusion. This was Mercy General Hospital in suburban Portland, Oregon, not a combat zone, not a military installation, and yet through the glass, they could all see the Navy markings on. That Seahawk helicopter could see armed personnel dropping to the grass before the skids had fully settled. "What the hell is this?" Marcus said, more to himself than anyone else. Emily didn't answer. She was already moving toward the door, her soft-soled shoes making no sound against the linoleum. But her stride had changed. Gone was the apologetic shuffle they'd grown accustomed to. This was purposeful, controlled, the walk of someone who'd crossed worse terrain than a hospital corridor. 3 weeks earlier, Emily had arrived at Mercy General with impeccable credentials and a resume that somehow seemed both impressive and vague. Certified in emergency medicine and trauma care, experience in high-stress environments, fluent in Arabic and Pashto. But when the staff had asked about her previous position, she'd simply said she'd worked abroad and changed the subject. They'd taken her quietness for weakness, her humility for incompetence. Dr. Chen especially had made sport of questioning her decisions, overriding her recommendations, dismissing her observations in front of patients. She'd never argued, never defended herself, just absorbed it all with those steady gray eyes and went back to work. Now, those same colleagues pressed against the break room window, watching her push through the main entrance and stride across the lawn toward the helicopter. The wind from the still spinning rotors whipped her dark hair across her face, but she didn't flinch. A man in navy dress uniform stepped forward, broad-shouldered, decorated, his bearing radiating authority that made the hospital security team instinctively. "Step back." He said something to Emily that no one else could hear over the rotor wash. She nodded once, turned, pointed back toward the emergency department. That's when the stretcher came out of the helicopter. Dr. Chen's coffee cup slipped from his hand, shattering against the floor in a spray of brown liquid and porcelain fragments. On that stretcher was a man, young, maybe 24, his uniform torn and bloody, his face pale as bone. And suddenly, the pieces began clicking into place for everyone watching from the windows. The helicopters. The urgency. The way Emily was already barking orders at the trauma team rushing out to meet them, her voice transformed from gentle to commanding, each syllable crisp as rifle fire. "Get me 2 units O-negative, prep trauma bay 1, and I need a chest tube. Kit standing by." The Emily they knew had vanished, and in her place stood someone else entirely. Someone who moved through chaos like she'd been born in it. The wounded SEAL was crashing. Pneumothorax, collapsing lung, internal bleeding. The kind of injuries that required steady hands and steadier nerves. The air erupted into controlled pandemonium as Emily led the team inside, and Dr. Chen found himself stumbling after them, his earlier arrogance drowning in a cold wash of realization. The senior nurses who'd laughed at her jokes about coffee. Preferences now watched her gloved hands work with surgical precision, inserting the chest tube with a confidence that spoke of having done this procedure in conditions far worse than a sterile trauma bay. Under mortar fire, perhaps. In field hospitals where the walls were canvas and the floor was sand. "Somebody want to tell me what's happening?" A nurse whispered. The Navy officer who had arrived on the helicopter stood in the corner, arms crossed, watching Emily work. "Lieutenant Emily Torres," he said quietly, his voice carrying despite the machines beeping around them. "Former Navy combat medic. 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq. She kept a SEAL team alive through a 3-day siege in Kandahar when they were cut off from evac. Saved 14 lives with a trauma kit and pure guts." He paused, his eyes never. Leaving Emily as she called for more gauze. One of those 14 was this kid on the table. His name's Jackson. He specifically asked for her when his unit's helicopter took fire during training exercises off the coast this morning. The silence in the trauma bay was broken only by the rhythmic beep of monitors and Emily's steady voice directing her team. Dr. Chen stood frozen near the door, watching her hands, the same hands he'd watched fumble nervously as patient. Charts, drop pens, tremble slightly, he'd raised his voice at her last Tuesday. Now moving with absolute certainty through torn tissue and damaged organs. She was murmuring to the unconscious SEAL, words meant only for him. "Stay with me, Jackson. You didn't survive Kandahar to die in Portland. Not on my watch." The surgery took 4 hours. When Emily finally stepped back and stripped off her bloodied gloves, Jackson's vitals were stable, his breathing regular, his chances good. The trauma bay emptied slowly, nurses and doctors filtering out with new understanding dawning in their eyes. But Emily remained standing beside the bed of a young warrior she'd saved once before and just saved again. The Navy officer approached, placed a hand on her shoulder. "He knew," the officer said, "when they were going down. He knew if anyone could save him, it was you." Emily's composure cracked just slightly, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I'm not that person anymore, Commander. I left that life behind." "Did you?" He gestured toward the monitoring equipment, the carefully sutured incision, the stable rhythm on the screen. "Because from where I'm standing, Lieutenant Torres never left at all. She just changed uniforms." Later, as evening settled over the hospital and Jackson slept peacefully under sedation, Dr. Marcus Chen found Emily in the same break room where he'd mocked her that morning. She was back in her regular scrubs, her hair pulled into its usual ponytail, hands wrapped around a fresh cup of coffee. She looked small again, quiet, but Marcus would never see her the same way. "I owe you an apology," he began, his voice thick with shame. Emily looked up, and her smile was gentle, the same gentle smile she'd worn every day for 3 weeks while absorbing his condescension and cruelty. "You didn't know," she said simply. "But I should have respected you regardless." Marcus sat down across from her, and the weight of his own behavior pressed against his chest like a stone. "Why didn't you tell us? Why let us treat you that way?" Emily was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee. "Because I came here to be normal," she finally said. "To help people without the weight of war on my shoulders. I didn't want to be the combat medic or the war hero. I just wanted to be Emily, the new nurse who's still learning the electronic charting system and brings donuts on Fridays." She looked up, her gray eyes holding his. "But some things don't leave you, I guess. Some parts of who we were stay written in our bones." Marcus nodded slowly, understanding blooming like pain in his chest. How many times had he dismissed her quietness as timidity? How many times had he mistaken her humility for inadequacy? She'd survived things he couldn't imagine, saved lives in conditions that would have broken him. And she'd done it all while asking for nothing. Not recognition, not gratitude, not even basic respect. "I'll do better," he said. "We all will," Emily replied, and her smile said she meant it. That forgiveness came as naturally to her as breathing. That she'd already moved past the hurt because holding on to it wasn't in her nature. The next morning, Emily arrived to find her locker decorated. Cards from the trauma team, a framed photo of Jackson giving a thumbs up from his recovery bed, and a small American flag tucked beside her name tag. Dr. Chen had sent an email to the entire department, not exposing her past, but asking for patience and kindness toward all new staff members, acknowledging his own failures in that regard. The change wasn't instant. Real change never is. But it was beginning, and Jackson recovered. Returning to active duty 3 months later, with a scar across his ribs and a story he'd tell. for the rest of his life about the quiet nurse in Portland who'd saved him twice, because strength doesn't always announce itself with noise and bravado. Sometimes it arrives in soft voices and gentle hands, waiting patiently for the moment when it's truly needed, and in a break room where laughter once came at someone's expense. Emily Torres poured her coffee, remembered the sound of helicopter blades, and smiled at the ordinary miracle of being exactly where she was meant to be. If this story touched you, drop a comment below and let me know what you think about the quiet heroes walking among us. And if you want more stories that remind you of the extraordinary courage hiding in ordinary places, hit that subscribe button. I'll be here, sharing these moments with you, one story at a time.